Yes, where do you think you're going, madam? Back to your room. We shall discuss this in the morning.
Well, historical research can certainly take you to some unusual and interesting places. Take a look at this one. Woodlands Manor in Mere, Wiltshire. The foundations of this place are 14th century. Now that means it was here at the time of the Black Death. It means that it was here at the time of the Civil War and the First English Republic. It was here at the time of the Glorious Revolution, the Industrial Revolution, and the French Revolution. But you know, I think perhaps the most extraordinary episode in the long history of this house occurred in the 18th century when it was in the control of the Pitt family. It's a love story. It involves scandal, controversy actually, which rocked the very heart of the English nation and ultimately changed English society's attitude towards marriage. And it all happened because 13-year-old Lucy Pitt fell in love.
My dearest Pitt.
The object of her affection was one Pierce Merrick, the 18-year-old son of Owen Merrick, wealthy landowner of Bodorgan, Anglesey, and former Whig MP for the county. The year was 1732, and Pierce was in his final term here in the exclusive surroundings of Westminster School. He and Lucy probably met through family friends, either here or during a fashionable promenade in the nearby Royal Park of St. James.
Now, at first glance, a marriage like that might seem an absolutely perfect one for all concerned. After all, marriage in the gentry classes in the 18th century was often just as much to do with consolidating business partnerships and pushing estates together as it was ever to do with falling in love. But Pierce was the fourth son of his family and as such highly unlikely ever to inherit any of his father's wealth or property.
Lucy, on the other hand, an only child, stood to inherit considerable wealth. Her mother died when she was 13, and she was entrusted to the guardianship of her severe and formidable aunt, Lady Essex Cholmondeley.
You will be educated with my daughter, Jane. You must understand that whatever liberties your mother and father allowed you, you are in my charge now, and will behave in a manner befitting your station. Embroidery, a little sketching, music, all the accomplishments necessary for a gentlewoman. For reading, the classics. None of these romances that can turn a young woman's head. Fresh air is important for your health, and I shall allow you to walk daily in the shrubbery. Go.
Although some guarded their charges with dragon-like ferocity, the 1730s could hardly be described as an age of Victorian prudery, nor was it an age of innocence. These were, after all, years in which steamy top-shelf novels like Moll Flanders and Fanny Hill became bestsellers. Sex was a national obsession, nothing particularly new about that. But of course, then children were rather less protected than they are now. We've come here to Bath, scene of the famous 18th century marriage market. Marriageable age was very young in those days,
14 for boys, 12 for girls. You could be dragged before a potential suitor more or less then as soon as you'd reached puberty. Here at the Holborn Museum, there's something I'd like to show you which I think will put some of those ideas into context.
This is the Holborn Museum's latest acquisition, a very fine painting by Angelica Kaufmann of Henrietta Poultney. We see her here tripping through an imaginary forest in the cool light of dawn, gaily picking flowers and looking extremely sweet. But there's something not quite right here. See how this delicate and elegant dress is low cut to indicate a developing bust. And look at the way the fall of the dress over her thighs shows her womanliness. Henrietta was only 11 years old when this picture was made, and I don't feel very comfortable with finding it an attractive image. It seems to me that what we have here is a girl who's grown up far too early. In many respects, an 18th century childhood ended as puberty began, and marriage was the next challenge. So for Lucy, messages were conflicting.
You must walk perfectly erect, and you shall not speak.
On the one hand, her aunt discouraged frivolity and flirting, perhaps hoping for a better match for her ward. But on the other, society expected girls of her age to seek a husband.
Lucy.
Lucy?
Lucy? I'm gonna get you, Lucy. Lucy?
Of course, not all young people particularly relished having to marry the nearest titled aristocrat with bad breath and wooden teeth. In that case, evasion was important. The best thing to do, of course, was to marry somebody else, and the best way of doing that was to marry them secretly and early.
Pierce,
A moment more, my love.
Lady Essex
Is an interfering old dragon.
will imminently be returned from her visit to the exchange. Now is no moment to try my virtue.
Your honour is as precious to me as life itself.
And stop kissing me so much.
Lucy, I'm only flesh and blood, and so are you. There's nothing for it then. I must marry you. Will you marry me, Lucy?
Clandestine marriage in England in the 18th century was rife. It was cheap and it was easy. You didn't need a license, you didn't need bans, you didn't even need a church. All you did need, for a veneer of respectability, was a clergyman.
The young lovers were determined to wed, but would Lady Essex be able to prevent it this time? In the shadow of St Paul's, I'm here at the heart of what used to be London's notorious Fleet district. The Fleet was famous as the location for London's largest debtors' prison. But in 1732, this was just the place you might want to come to if you wanted to get married in secret. But why here? And why get married in a prison? To ease overcrowding in the jail, some debtors were allowed to reside outside the prison walls in an area known as the Liberties or Rules of the Fleet. This was a district bounded by Farringdon Street, Ludgate Hill, the Old Bailey and Fleet Lane. Debtors' prisons in particular were always well stocked with penniless clergymen who were only too ready to tie the knot for a small gratuity. So when Parliament banned clandestine marriages in prison buildings, the growing trade simply relocated to seedy boarding houses and taverns, often with signs over the door showing clasped male and female hands. No wonder Pierce Merrick thought this was the ideal place to come and get married away from prying eyes and ears.
Oh, Lucy. You thought I wouldn't come? I waited all night for you once and you didn't arrive. Did I doubt you loved me? What little faith you have in me, madam.
It took so long to make sure my aunt was asleep.
But you're here now. Come, there's a priest I know of nearby who's the stuff of your aunt's nightmares.
It wouldn't take you very long to get yourself fitted up with an obliging cleric. There were 300,000 unlicensed Fleet weddings in the first half of the 18th century. One cleric could deal with 2,000 in a single year. At 10 shillings a go, that's pretty good money for a parson without a living.
Come.
We want to get married.
Marriage is a very serious business. One should never enter into it lightly. She looks a little young.
I am 13.
How much?
10 shillings.
Done.
You got a ring?
Of course.
Stick it on her finger. I now pronounce you man and wife together. Now, where's the register?
So, Pierce and Lucy were married.
But were they? The anecdotal evidence says they were, but what we want is a bit of hard proof. And this is the place to try. I've brought you now to one of my all-time favourite haunts, the Public Record Office at Kew. And they're public records, so anyone can get in and have a look at them. So let's do that. Let's have a rummage.
You wouldn't believe the stuff they've got in here. Mile after mile of manuscripts charting the whole culture of government from the Middle Ages to the present. The complete collected correspondence of the Home Office, the Foreign Office, the Admiralty, several centuries of assize court records, cabinet minutes and secret government memorandums, eyewitness accounts of the 1831 Bristol Reform riots, and, fortunately for us, the original Fleet marriage registers. I must say, I just love these tatty old registers. They're incredibly fragile, so we have to be very careful with them. But you can see, can't you, just from how tatty they are and how quickly they've been written, this was marriage in a hurry. Just look at all these names in here. they must hide the most incredible human stories. Perhaps people trying to annul existing unions through a bigamous marriage. Perhaps poor people who couldn't afford to get a licence. And then, of course, there's all those innocent young heiresses being whisked away by predatory gold diggers so that the families of the girl wouldn't know. Ah! Here it is. I found it. It's taken 3 days looking for this, but here it is at last. Look. Pierce Merrick, County of Anglesey, a gentleman betrothed to Lucy Pitt, and underneath we've even got the name of the officiating cleric, one Sam Backler.
Your name?
Pierce Merrick.
Pierce Merrick with a Y?
Yes.
From?
Bud Organ.
Bud Organ. Organ. Yours?
Lucy Pitt.
Lucy.
Sam Backler shared this particular register with about 4 or 5 other clerics who were all doing weddings from the same pub.
I wish you joy of each other.
Thank you.
To be fair to the Fleet Parsons, many of them were probably only trying to clear their debts.
Thank you kindly.
And they made far better livings as marriage mongers inside than they could ever have done outside.
To France, Lucy.
What if they should follow?
They won't follow, Lucy. We'll be safe in France. Come on.
Somehow Lady Essex had been alerted. A sixth sense, a tip-off, we'll probably never know. But was she able to catch up with the seafaring newlyweds? Sea travel to France in the 1730s wasn't just easy, it was massively popular. It was, after all, the first stage of the Grand Tour.
God protect the Kathleen and me. Is that the name of the ship?
I think so,
It's
yes.
a pretty name.
Most people undertaking that particular journey preferred to go from Dover. But Lucy and Pierce were in a hurry, and here they were in the middle of the largest commercial port in Europe.
To us, Mrs. Merrick. The most beautiful woman I've ever seen, Lucy.
Tickles.
Madam, you will come with me. You, sir, I will leave to the tender mercies of your own parent.
Let's do something.
You're too late. We're married.
Those whom God hath joined, let no man put asunder.
It's too late.
The Pitts have powerful friends. You will cease this absurd behavior, madam.
Lucy was a relative of the future great statesman William Pitt, an influential man by the time Lord Hardwicke proposed his new Marriage Act, and therefore a man with every reason to take a personal interest in this new bill.
My noble lords, I beg leave to introduce a bill for the better preventing of clandestine marriages, whereas great mischiefs and inconveniences have arisen from such unions.
It took many years to change the law, and this particular act attracted much fierce debate.
If this bill passes into law, no commoner will ever marry a rich heiress.
Our quality and rich families will daily accumulate riches by marrying only one another. What sort of breed would their offspring be?
He's my husband!
A girl just turned 12 years of age even the king's eldest daughter, may be seduced to marry the lowest and most infamous wretch I can name, so that the son, perhaps of a footman, might come to have a legal right to the crown of these realms.
Order!
Out of all that acrimonious parliamentary debate came the 1753 Marriage Act. It put the skids under the Fleet weddings because it prevented anyone under the age of 21 getting married without parental consent. And it ruled that the only valid marriage was one solemnised by an Anglican cleric in an Anglican church after a proper licence had been paid for and the banns had been read 3 times. A victory for morality, the triumph of property over the rights of love. The government recouped its lost tax revenues, the aristocracy consolidated their grip on the nation's land and power, and the lower orders were financially discouraged from marrying at all. And what of Lucy? She was removed from polite society and pined for Pierce, who was probably sent off on the grand tour to cool his ardour. Woodlands Manor still has its chapel, once used as a place of Christian worship by the villagers of Mere, and today it's still used as a picturesque wedding setting. These days, it's possible to get married as discreetly or as triumphantly as you like. You can have a church wedding. If you prefer, you can have a secular wedding. With a special licence, you can even get married at just 48 hours' notice. That means that you could meet your spouse on a Monday, marry them on a Wednesday, start divorce proceedings on the Friday, and leave Saturday to wrangle over the record collection.
Wilt thou, Lucy, have this man to thy lawful wedded husband, to live together after God's ordinance in the holy estate of matrimony? Wilt thou obey him and serve him, love, honour, and keep him, in sickness and in health, and forsaking all other, keep thee only unto him, so long as ye both shall live?
I will.
Who giveth this woman to be married to this man?
I do.
We don't know what prompted Lady Essex's change of heart. Perhaps it was the fact that Pierce came from a good family. You can be sure they worked out a financial settlement. So a number of years after their clandestine marriage, Pierce and Lucy were married again, properly this time, officially, with banns and a bona fide certificate and all the trimmings.
And thereto,
And thereto,
I give thee my troth.
I give thee my troth.
With this ring I thee wed.
With this ring I thee wed.
And so, full circle, the echoes of the past linger on to the present day at Woodlands Manor.
Those whom God hath joined together, let no man put asunder. I now pronounce you man and wife together.